Hey guys, what's going on? It's Ash here coming at you today in Clash Royale with one of my very first pro guests of all time, and now he's since become the best and most popular player in all of the world, all of the land. It's Surgical Goblin. Frank, how you doing, man?
Hey man, I'm doing great. Really happy to be on the channel again. What's up?
Dude, I was just looking through our Twitter DMs and I looked at our. This is like something you do in a relationship. It's kind of creepy, but I looked at our very first message and it was just so interesting to see how far you've come and dominated the CR world. You were like, hey, any advice on how to get noticed or whatever? It was just so funny. And now look at you. You're the most winning player, A, and you're also the biggest English speaking YouTuber in Clash Royale. Did you realize that in terms of the average views?
Yeah, it's crazy, man. Like, to be honest, sometimes I don't even know how to like describe it and what to say because it's just like amazing and the amount of support I get and it's just crazy and like big shout out to you for sure because you helped me a lot.
Now I have to ask you for advice on YouTube. But awesome, dude, you deserve it, obviously, and I truly mean that. So enough of
Thank
the
you.
mushy stuff, but we want to talk a little bit. I want to start with King's Cup a little bit, ask you about those final matches and about your incredible win streak at live events. And then I really want to get into the meat of this episode, which will be like deck construction from you, who's like a deck construction guru. So before we get to that stuff, let's start with King's Cup 2. And most recently, I mean, it's hard to keep up with you, but you actually won ESWC as well. So
Yep.
congratulations on that. Uh,
Thank you.
Going against Atchiin, let's take it to the finals here because I was right there, and man, I was unbelievably excited at the end, but I was on the edge of my seat. It was insane. You ended up beating him in the best of five, the final match, and it was you beat Lava Loon, and we'll play it in the background, by the way, guys. You beat Lava Loon, and you had a bait deck that only had air targeting Princess, Ice Spirit, and what else? I
Gang.
think that's it, right?
Two spirit goblins from the gang.
Two Spirit Goblins from the Goblin Gang. So,
Yeah.
man, like, that's a very difficult matchup for you, even though you do have Tornado, but still, like, you just don't have a lot to combo it with. You
Yeah,
know,
and the Inferno Dragon. Like, yes, the Inferno Dragon, so that's
yes,
difficult.
yeah, he
Yep.
had Lava Loon Inferno Dragon. Wow, that's nasty. So, man, walk us through a little bit. What's going on in your head during this matchup that we're watching right now in the background? Like, how did you handle it, knowing the deck that he was going to be playing once you saw the first couple cards?
So at first, like the format, you had to like three decks. My three decks. I only played two decks in the entire best of five, but my third deck was actually P.E.K.K.A. Minor Control. But it had minions and he had arrows in his Lava Loon deck and also Inferno Dragon for my P.E.K.K.A. So that wouldn't be smart playing it.
Hmm.
I also had a balloon deck, but that only had the princess as like an air targeting unit. So I had to play like Lockbait, and I'm really confident with it as well. But in that matchup, like I beat it before, and you basically have to keep the pressure up. I don't know, at what moment the replay is playing at the background, but I'm sure you will, like you guys watching right now, you will see me like pressuring with, for example, Night Goblin Gang when he places down the Lava Hound, just because I know that I like have how do you say that, like lack of air like counters.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to force him to spend his elixir so he isn't able to build like a killing push, which I know I can't defend. So I'm trying to keep up the pressure and doing that chipping away and trying to defend as good as possible with either the tornado, maybe like a defensive rocket. But yeah, it's quite difficult.
Oh man, well you did an amazing job, and at the end, man, it was just so you couldn't have asked for a better final from a viewer standpoint, you know, and almost gave
Yeah.
me a heart attack too. But and I'm sure it did. I can't imagine what was going through your head when you because you picked up the first two matches, then you lost two matches, and then it's just like, oh my gosh, it was all riding on that one match. But you know, in general, when you're playing a deck that you don't have a lot of counters for, especially like a faster deck like you were playing the bait deck. How do you know like when to push and how aggressive you can push, kind of along the lines of what you just said? So you had to keep up the pressure, but there's probably a line somewhere where too much pressure is bad because you'll have absolutely nothing to defend. So like, how do you kind of gauge that if you're going against a heavier deck?
That's really difficult to answer just because you have like so many different situations where you can like where you don't have to commit too much, where you do have to commit a lot,
Hmm.
etc. So I can't really tell one specific situation, but I guess like when your opponent if has a lot of elixir, like in this case like a lava hound 7 elixir, you know that they won't have that much elixir to counter. So it's okay to punish, for example, with 6 elixir on the other side. Just make sure, as you said, like don't overcommit because you still need to defend. Like you still need to have something to defend with. But that's
Yeah.
also, as I said, like totally depends on the situations. Like it's just something you have to experience, I guess, like just by playing a lot, and then you can sort of like see what works in like different kind of situations.
Yeah, that's a good answer. And before we move on to deck construction, one more question about like that matchup is I noticed that when you play bait, you oftentimes just throw a goblin barrel even though you know they have like a good counter in hand. Is that just to get that counter out of hand and set yourself up for the next push?
Yeah, or like knowing that if I throw the barrel and he uses the counter, even though he has it in hand, then like I know I can try to outcycle afterwards, knowing that he won't have that counter again because he needs to play 4 cards.
Okay, great. And that's probably another example of you being aggressive, like play the card, get the counter, and then boom, 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 cycle back and then hit him
Yeah,
again hard.
yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
so talk us through deck creation because I mean, I really envy your channel and I go watch all your videos and you start out at like 9 wins in a challenge, in a grand challenge usually, and then you usually just sweep the table and you come up with unique decks. Like you don't always, I mean, you stay pretty close to meta, but you're not afraid to like throw your own variations of things in there. So,
Yeah.
like for people out there at home watching or wherever they are, what would you recommend if they're going to start building a deck? Like, where do you start? Where does Surgical Goblin start? Do you start with a deck that you like that's similar to something, or do you start with a win condition, or just kind of walk us through the process?
I think it depends per player. For example, me, I really like the princess. So if there is, for example, a tournament which doesn't have a ban like system, I know that I will be able to use the princess. So then I could build like a deck around it. And in this case, like I will take the princess as an example. You know that it can bait out like a spell like lock. So try to put, for example, goblins in or a barrel or like a goblin gang or something that like has a good synergy with that card. Of
Okay.
course, as you said, like you need to have a win condition. So what will be our win condition? Like, is it chip? Will it be a miner? Maybe a hawk rider? So, like then you need to pick the win condition. Sometimes it's okay to have 2 win conditions. I wouldn't put in 3 because that could be like giving an awkward cycle. Same for the spells. Like I would say that 2 is perfect. 3 could be, but definitely not more than 3 because then you will have like such an awkward cycle. Um, and other than that, of course, like you need defensive units. So it depends like on the deck as well. For example, Tornado also has a good synergy with Princess again. So that could be like a defensive card which has a synergy with it and not necessarily an offensive card. But that could also be a building or like a heavy hitter, like a mini P.E.K.K.A, for example.
Yeah, and let's stop you right there about like buildings and defenses. So if my memory serves me, it seems like you kind of prefer just having like tornado and like spells rather
Yeah.
than buildings, but maybe I'm incorrect there. But like where do you stand right now in the meta on buildings, even like including like tombstone as well, versus just having the spells and the troops and not the buildings?
I think Tombstone is a really good building because it's only 3 elixir and it can actually like do really well. Also versus a heavy tank like a golem, even though it's like it seems like really weak versus the golem. But I prefer, as you said, like Tornado. You were correct on that. Just because I think Tornado can offer so much value, like just for the 3 elixir, being able to, let's say they have like a really big push coming, and you're using Lockbait with Tornado. You can Tornado everything together and then throw a rocket, and for the 9 elixir, you will like damage or kill the tank. Then you will also be able to like kill all the support units, and I think it can just offer like so much value, and I really like it.
How do you choose the spells for your deck? So let's say you have a deck created, your own custom deck, and let's just say it's a Golem deck. Because I've noticed that Golem was always like old school. Golem was always paired with Lightning, right?
Yeah.
And then it kind of shifted, and then people started using Fireball or whatever. And now it's like Golem, if you see a golem, you don't know what spell they have. They could have poison, they could have fireball. So how do you select a good spell that kind of synergizes well with the deck? How do you identify what kind of spell you want? Even the same question having to do with like log versus zap versus arrows.
That's a good question. I think it depends on the meta because what you said in the like with the lightning, there used to be like everyone used to be, for example, using minor control, but then with Inferno. or Lockbait, but then with Inferno. And Lightning was just to like counter the building, like the Inferno. But right now you don't really see the buildings often. You more have like tornadoes or, for example, heavy hitters like Night Witch, Electro Wizard, Mini Pack, etc. So then poison is better because you can like get value out of your poison, hitting all their defensive units instead of the building.
Okay, so you think it's just like a lot of when you're picking your spells, it sounds like you're more picking them for the most part like reactively to what you think you're going to be playing versus what you think is good for your specific deck.
Yeah, true. Like I wouldn't, for example, recommend using lightning if you know your opponent will use like a swarmy deck. Then you rather pick like the poison.
And the last question I have about deck construction, Surge, is about cycle cards and their importance in a deck. So even if you're playing a heavy deck, I want to get your opinion on including like skeletons, ice spirit, or even ice golem and bats and cards that cost 1 or 2 elixir. Do you think those cards are important to have in any deck because they provide even your deck is really cycles as fast as your 3 cheapest cards, right? So do you think it's important to have like 3 cheap cards in any deck so you can cycle to a win condition or cycle to a counter, or does it really just depend on the deck that you're building?
I think it depends on the deck that you're building, but personally, like I'm a really fast cycle player, so in almost every deck of me, you will find a card like the Ice Spirit, like the Ice Golem. So personally, I'm really good with it because personally, like I'm able to adapt to my opponent's cycle, as you said, like out cycle counters and stuff. But maybe another player is like really good with beatdown, and then putting in skeletons in a column deck isn't as good because you rather have like really good support units behind it, and the skeleton might like take that spot for example, the baby dragon.
Yeah, that's a good point. And off meta cards, you're also known for playing off meta decks quite often, especially in CCGS. Like you busted out some really interesting decks. Like I think you had a bowler mirror deck or something like that last season. But you know, what do you think of including off meta cards, and maybe what are a couple off meta cards that you've kind of identified as more valuable than people might give them credit?
I think the point of using off meta like decks, for example, as you said in CCGS, I think that like the surprise factor is really key. Like your opponent, like right now, for example, the meta, I would just give 3 decks, like the Mega Knight Hawk deck, the Lockbait, and an Expo deck. Then your opponent might adjust to it and use, for example, a P.E.K.K.A. But if you will then suddenly use, I don't know, whatever, like a giant skeleton mortar deck or something, if your opponent isn't like ready for it, it could throw them off guard, and that could like, yeah, give you the win.
So, are there a few cards out there that you think, like, you know, I'm not saying they're OP or amazing, but maybe that you think, hey, those cards actually could be used, you know, maybe like guards or I don't know, giant skeleton or dark prince or any of those cards that you kind of say, hey, they actually hold a lot. I actually like those cards.
Yeah, I think for me, if I would name one card, it would be the mirror. I actually used it in CCGS as well. And it can offer a lot of value. Let's say you have a situation where opponent pushes with the balloon, you put the zap, you put the bets, I mean, and they use the zap, so they spend 7 elixir. Then you can mirror, and they won't have any counters, and you still are able to counter their push really well, and also for a positive elixir trade.
Excellent. That's a great piece of advice. So use mirror according to Surge out there, and it's good. You can dodge counters very easily with mirror. It's a smart thing. So Surge, I just wanted to thank you so much again for coming on, man. I think this is great advice to help people constructing decks, and also kind of a good breakdown of your match against Atchiin. I wish you good luck, but I don't think you need it, man. You're dominating. So, but still, best of luck with everything, man. You're a great guy and a great friend too. So thanks for coming on, man.
Thank you very much, man. It was a pleasure.
No problem. So, guys, that's going to do it. Make sure you go subscribe and follow Surgical Goblin, Instagram, Twitter, whatever, and YouTube if you're not already, which I imagine most of you are, if not all of you. So, guys, check out Surge. Check out my YouTube partner, Bren Chong. His information's also in the description below. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, take care, guys.